There's lots of references in this book about the fact that Lilibet was a pretty lousy knitter. And they were still at Windsor when Christmas came around again, and it didn't look like it was going to be very merry for anyone at all. So it was decided they would put on a play. Let's put on a show. Very Mickey Rooney and Julie Garland, isn't it? And the play was The Christmas Child, and Lilibet had a golden crown and a velvet tunic. And they had the little child in the shepherd's hut, and that was Margaret, and she sang Gentle Jesus, Meek and Mild without any accompaniment, and she seemed to be rather good. She shocked everyone how good she was. The shepherds were all schoolboys. They had scarves around their heads and very much looked the part and did a very good murmuring scene. The King and Queen were absolutely amazed at the entire performance, and so was everybody else, and they put a collection plate around. They didn't actually charge for tickets for this one, although they did at future performances, all for charity, of course, and they raised £30 just through the collection plate. The success of our first effort made us very ambitious. One day I said half-jokingly, I really believe we could do a pantomime. And from that moment there wasn't a moment's peace. Margaret was after me incessantly. CRAWFIE, you did say... And she began all these sort of drawings of Aladdin because she wanted to do the pantomime Aladdin. I spoke to the King about it one weekend. By all means have a pantomime, CRAWFIE, if you think it's a good idea. I don't think for the moment he took the matter rather seriously. There was a schoolmaster at the Royal School at Windsor Great Park named Hubert Tanner. The school was built by Queen Victoria for all the estate children, and the schoolmaster was a delightful Welshman who at one time had been on the stage, Gilbert and Sullivan, an actor himself, and knew a lot about stagecraft and producing. We invited him to tea, and he and I and the children talked it all over. In the end, it was decided that Mr. Tanner would write a pantomime for his own school children, bringing in all the jokes, and he would fit in bits for the two princesses, and that we would produce it at the castle. It was not long before he brought us the script, which seemed wonderful. We immediately began rehearsals, at which Mr. Tanner himself took charge. So CRAWFIE was very lucky that Mr. Tanner took charge. It saved her a lot of work. The leading man who played opposite Lilibet was one Cyril Wood, and Cyril Wood went on to become a member of staff at the castle. The two princesses thoroughly enjoyed all the pantomime stunts, but most of all the scene where they both sat on one end of the bench while Cyril Wood sat on the other. They then got up and he fell off onto the floor. One day, by way of change, he got up first and they both collapsed on the floor, much to everyone's intense amusement. Our first pantomime was Cinderella. Margaret had long since made up her mind that she would be Cinderella. Lilibet was Principal Boy. Both the children did their parts extremely well, and in the coach scene, Margaret was delightful. We had wonderful choruses with songs, and we trained in great style. We drilled all those taking part right up to the very last moment. All of this, of course, served the purpose of taking the young people's minds off the war and bringing them together with others of their own age. Now, then they decided what were they going to charge for tickets for the pantomime, because they decided they wanted to print up proper tickets and charge. And it was decided by the Queen that 7 and 6pence was rather a lot, but she eventually agreed, and they were for the very best seats. Then second best was 5 shillings and on down to a shilling. We had programs printed and did everything down to the smallest detail in great style. So Margaret used to get really nervous, and on the morning of the performance, Ella told CRAWFIE that she was positively green in the face, and CRAWFIE went up to see her, but Margaret said, "Oh no, I'll be fine, CRAWFIE." But she stayed in bed until about 10 minutes before, and then she got up, had her makeup slapped on, and she was perfectly all right. Lilibet took it all much more calmly, though I know she too was very excited, but she never showed her feelings as much as Margaret. Yes, she's a very calm character, wasn't she? About 70 young officers altogether came and went during our time at Windsor. We kept a record of their names, and when the war got really bad and they went off, we would hear from time to time that one had been killed. Princess Elizabeth was always the first to write to the mother of the officer and give her a little picture of how much she'd appreciated him at Windsor and what they'd talked about, and that was entirely her own idea. The two girls were always immensely interested in airmen, which is, smacks of foretells Margaret being very interested in the hero Peter Townsend. The RAF took their fancy, and the men who went up in aircraft were their heroes. When an airman was to be decorated by the king, there was quite a flutter in the schoolroom. The princesses always went down to peep through the doors. American soldiers came a lot to the castle, and the little girls fascinated them, but it came quite difficult to keep a straight face because their conversation opener was always, "I've got a little girl at home just your age." It got so difficult for the children to keep their faces straight, but they struggled manfully. "CRAWFIE," whispered Margaret once to me, "the children there in America, all our age, there must be billions of them." The Americans collected postcards of the princesses, and one day there was immense excitement because one of them asked if they could send them a box of chocolates, particularly to Lilibet. So to the children at that time, sweets of any kind, because they were very scarce, obviously, because of rationing, were an immense treat, and they counted the days till the parcel duly arrived. In June 1944, the war took a sudden turn. An entirely new affliction came upon us. One hot Sunday, the royal family was usual at church in St George's Hall at Windsor when news came from the Guards' Chapel in Wellington Barracks opposite Buckingham Palace. They'd taken a direct hit from a very strange new kind of pilotless weapon. The place had been wrecked and a great many people killed, including the sister of the Queen's treasurer. And these were, of course, the dreadful V1, pilotless bombs. I had not been to church that day, had gone out to lunch, and I'd returned to the castle to find everyone in a state of chaos. The King and Queen anxiously awaiting further news. For the one and only time during the whole war, I saw the Queen really shaken, because they were so silent. It was only this little tiny whirring noise. You couldn't really, ordinary bombs and aircraft, they could sort of listen. They could say, oh, that's one of ours or that's one of theirs, and they knew they were coming and they had time to get to the shelter. But with the V1s, you were lucky to miss it, particularly if you were doing something noisy. It's only a little whir. And out of the blue, they could be whirring overhead, then out of the blue, they would just suddenly drop. And if they did, you're a goner. And you didn't have time to get out of the way. Now, they had a very close call. We actually had our first sight of a V1 when we were cooking sausages with the Girl Guides in Windsor Park. The guide captain and I heard the thing coming, luckily, and we made everyone lie down. I lay next to Margaret and flung myself across her, and we waited, and we saw the thing go over us mercifully. It kept going. It cut out and dropped on the Windsor racecourse several miles ahead, and we were shaken, truly shaken by the explosion. At this time, I noticed the little girls showing signs of strain. Conversation would break off, and we knew that they were listening. I would be listening. It would be terrifying. People were frightened to hold conversations because they were so wary in those first few dreadful months of the V1, listening for this whirring. I started a series of parties which we called clump parties, to which I invited all the young officers I could find. The Duchess of Kent would come over, and we had an equal number of young men and girls, and we played hide and seek and sardines. We had wonderful treasure hunts with rhyming clues and prizes. I was on holiday when Buckingham Palace was bombed. I saw a newsreel in Scotland showing the walls of my bedroom all down and a housemaid looking out the broken window. Thank goodness she was on holiday.